Thank you, colleagues. I think we will begin the call now. It is 5 minutes past 10. Colleagues, welcome to this our weekly Thursday 10 a.m. webinars between the research and scientific community and civil society. This call is brought to you by the Vaccine Advocacy Resource Group, a group that is 100% funded by activists. It is also brought to you by the African Alliance with the support from the SAHPRA and the Department of Science and Innovation. Colleagues, today we speak to Professor Jeffrey Mpahlele, who has since October 2014 been the Vice President for Research at the South African Medical Research Council. He's an elected member of the Academy of Science of South Africa and National Research Foundation C1 rated researcher. He's affiliated to Sefako Makgatho Health Sciences University, formerly Medunsa, in Pretoria, where he previously served as an academic for over 20 years in various capacities. Colleagues, Professor Mpahlele's research interests include epidemiology and genomics of infectious diseases, vaccination control of infectious diseases, and strengthening immunization services and policies. He trained, supervised, and mentored several Ph.D. and master's students as his contribution to developing the next generation of scientists. Mpahlele serves on several boards and government structures. Is the Vice Chair of the European and Developing Countries Clinical Trials Partnership Association, the Vice Chair of the Global Research Collaboration for Infectious Disease Preparedness, the Vice-Chairperson of the National Health Laboratory Service, a member of the South African Health Products Regulatory Authority Board, and a member of the Poliomyelitis Research Foundation Board of Directors. In addition, he serves on a number of committees, including the WHO Scientific Advisory Group of Experts Polio Working Group. Colleagues, today we are going to hear from Professor Mpahlele an overview of his time at the MRC, both before and during COVID, some of the lessons that he has learned during the time of COVID, and guide us in terms of what strategic developments that are on the research landscape coming up that we as advocates in civil society should be aware of. So colleagues, without further ado, I'd like to thank Professor Mpahlele for giving us some time of his this morning. Professor Mpahlele, if you can hear me, I'll hand over to you.
Diana, I can hear you very well, and let me start by just expressing my sincere thanks to the African Alliance and the Vaccine Advocacy Group for inviting me to this COVID-19 conversation. I understand it is about, conversation, it's not academic lecture. So I tried to really put together, some talking points so that I can be as provocative as I can, but with the aim of really igniting debate at the end of the presentation. So that is my approach to this conversation. And you have already introduced me, and I don't really think I need to spend so much time talking about myself and what I've been doing since I've joined South African Medical Research Council in 2014. Suffice to say that it's been a wonderful experience moving from academia to a research council that is dedicated to not just doing research, but also funding research, because that's what MRC is about. But as part of doing research, of course, we feel that we do have an obligation because we also coming from academic environment, and we are affiliated to tertiary institutions. So we need to talk about research, and we need to promote research, and we need to make sure that if there are research results that can benefit the community, we should really be proactive in translating these research results. So what I thought I can do in the next 20 minutes that is allocated to me, I thought maybe I should just share with the audience some of the lessons that I've learned or I've noted actually, as COVID-19 pandemic unfolded in South Africa since the 5th of March. So I think most of you have been following the pandemic in South Africa, and you know what happened. But I think with this platform, I just want to handpick some of the experiences which will probably inform our engagement after my presentation. So I'm going to switch off my my video if you don't mind, now that you have seen me, and then I'll just continue talking in the background. So we know that this pandemic is going to be with us, and we don't know how long it will be with us. It can be 2, it can be 3 years, but I think from my reading of the situation, it shouldn't be with us beyond 3 years, because by then we should have enough population immunity to really counteract SARS-CoV-2. The most important thing at the moment is really a discussion about what would be the best exit strategy from the current stage of the pandemic, because this is still year 1 of the pandemic, and we have seen the potential of what this pandemic can do to the society, and it's not just about South Africa; it's the world over. So my first take is that if a country is handling a public health emergency of this magnitude, like we have with COVID-19, you definitely need an emergency response. And the lesson that I've learned is that the emergency response should be impactful, although quite often it doesn't have to be perfect. So even if this response is imperfect, the bottom line is that you should aim to be impactful, and you should also aim to change the strategy if you feel that the strategy that you have already put in place is not quite impactful. And for many countries, this was the first time they had to deal with a pandemic like SARS-CoV-2, South Africa included. Some countries were lucky in the sense that they had to deal with some outbreaks in the past. If you think about West Africa, some Asian countries, even South American countries, they had to deal with outbreaks like Ebola, Zika, SARS, and MERS-CoV-2, sorry, MERS-CoV, and they gained experience from this because the experience they gained, they've been able to apply it to a pandemic that we have currently. Although, as I said, the magnitude is different. And unfortunately for South Africa, this was the first time we had to grapple with this kind of a pandemic. And because of that, our emergency response, no matter how impactful it has been, but it hasn't been perfect. And I think if one has to ask a question, like, if you think about the South African public health response, what would you say? How would you rate it up to now? Has it been adequate? Has it been perfect? And suppose you are in an authority, you are in a position where you have to advise the government or even the Minister of Health what else can you really persuade the government to consider? Or maybe during the time when the strategy, the response strategy was being crafted, what is it that you could have really shared with the government as something to be considered? Now that you know the impact of this pandemic to the society. And I'm not just talking about the health only. I'm talking about the impact in terms of social impact, the economy, the well-being of the citizens of South Africa. If you think about regulations that are enforcing isolation and restriction on movement, what impact are these regulations having on the mental health, for example, of the general public, and other groups that are more vulnerable, like the elderly. They cannot be visited, even by their own family members, because you don't want to put them at risk. Groups like children, they can't mingle as they used to, and definitely these are some of the impact that things like hard lockdowns have had on the society, and we have to grapple with this going forward. So clearly, for me, the issue here is that if you have got a public health emergency, you need to respond, you need to make decisions, but as you make decisions, can you really balance these decisions with realities? And are these decisions rational and realistic? And quite often, when you reflect deep, you realize that you may not be able to tick all the boxes, but unfortunately, you are forced to make decisions because you are in an emergency mode, and you have to make decisions. But the key thing for me is that if the decisions are made, when you feel that they are not serving the purpose, be prepared to adjust the decisions. Be prepared to adjust the recommendations and the guidelines, and even the policies. Be nimble enough, to accommodate the emerging evidence, so that you are always relevant and you can defend your position. So I would leave this topic there, and just maybe invite those who are on the line just to think about it more, in terms of what is it that you could have done better as you respond to this public health emergency. But now we know, how South Africa has actually responded, even if we are still in the middle, of the pandemic. So the second area that I would like to touch on is related to the diversity of views during a crisis, because an emergency is like a crisis. And I think it's important to say that what I have learned so far during this COVID-19 is the fact that there is a need for a robust and diverse views of opinions. Even if, this can be conflicting at times, but you need to open the space for this, because if you don't, once again, you may not be able to really accommodate different views, and you may not be able to look at things differently. And just to give you or refresh your mind, because you've been part, one way or the other, of this, scientific debates and public debates. If you reflect back, right from the beginning, of the pandemic in South Africa, there was a debate about wearing of masks. Is it really important? And is it something that should be mandatory? And when you reflect now, and you see that actually this has been very useful, a useful topic to debate at the beginning of the pandemic. Because if we did not have this debate, perhaps we could have missed the opportunity to really understand the usefulness of wearing masks. And perhaps is actually wearing masks and other non-pharmaceutical interventions that we are practicing as a country that have been able to reduce the potential impact of the pandemic to the citizens of South Africa. We don't know yet, but if we did not, reflect on that, we could have lost the opportunity. And another area, it was about asymptomatic infections. And you can even remember that an organization like the World Health Organization, at one point, it had to debate this, whether asymptomatic infections are important. Can this be source of transmission? And how critical is it to really accommodate asymptomatic infections? And now that we know that we do have lots and lots of cases of people who are walking around unaware that they are infected, then you realize that it's actually important that because you cannot tell if the person is infected or not when he's walking there in the street, then it is important that you need to make sure that you emphasize on non-pharmaceutical interventions. Then the other area is the area of treatment. At the beginning, people can remember the discussion, which is still going on, of course, but this was about hydroxychloroquine. Does it work? And if it does work, to what extent? How effective it is? And we still don't have an answer, but we know that we moved away from hydroxychloroquine. It could be that it might resurface in the future. So we just need to watch the space. Then another area is about airborne transmission of SARS-CoV-2. This was very recent, but the debate was very much impactful in terms of our public health interventions to the virus, because if we didn't take this into account, we would be very casual and still don't really take SARS-CoV-2 transmission and seriously, and maybe just stick to what we know. But the fact that we have accommodated this, even if WHO says we still need more evidence, we do connect to the issue of airborne transmission. We're not saying that it does not exist, but we need more evidence. But the fact that we can talk about it and we can adjust our public health interventions to accommodate the possibility of airborne transmission, then it's good for the society in terms of mitigating the impact of COVID-19. Then something also recent is about children, whether the children are poor transmitters or not. And this was a huge debate and eventually led to the discussion on reopening of schools. What do we need to do? Is it safe, and so on? And as you know, the discussion is still there. But all this is important because every time we open the debate, and we have this diversity of views, we are able to really put more stringent measures to contain the epidemic. So I think maybe I should leave this, public debates and scientific debates there. I just thought I should just refresh your minds on the kinds of debates that we had since the beginning of the pandemic. But the most important thing being that we need to accommodate, the diversity of views, because if we don't, once again, we will miss the opportunity to really look at things differently and consider different views as well. So I want to move to number 3, and this one is very close to me because it's exactly what we do on daily basis as researchers. So this is about really, doing research during a public health emergency, because there are some views, and other views are that you cannot do this because you are most likely to exploit the people who participate in the research. And I just want to make it clear that if you are dealing with a public health emergency, especially like we have with COVID-19, where the cause of the public health emergency is unknown, because SARS-CoV-2 is a new virus. Actually, you have got no recourse in terms of fighting the pandemic if you don't have the right treatment regimens, if you don't have prevention technologies like vaccines. We know that public health, the non-pharmaceutical interventions are there as socio-behavioral prevention strategies, but ideally we need biomedical interventions like vaccines, and you cannot be able to respond and come up with new vaccines, new drugs, unless you do research. And even if you are faced, with a public health emergency. So once again, I think I just like to emphasize the point that there is a need for research, even if you are faced with a public health emergency. And researchers, funders, non-governmental organizations, local communities, international communities, and other stakeholders, they need to work together to come up with strategies to mitigate the pandemic. And what is a priority, of course, would be the strategies which will help in terms of improving clinical management of those who are infected, and also, strategies that will prevent, transmission in the community. So the area of, drugs and vaccines are really important when you deal with a public health emergency where you don't have treatments and you don't have vaccines. So what would be the roles of the different role players then during research? Because we know that we have got academic institutions, we have got funders like South African Medical Research Council, and other funders in the country, of course. We have got regulatory authorities like SAHPRA. What is the role of these different stakeholders? They each have a role, and they need to exercise their roles because they have to protect the public one way or the other. If I have to talk about the role of the MRC, we do have the interest of the public at heart. There's no question about that. But our immediate role is to make sure that we are able to fund research that will make a difference in containing the pandemic, and we are able to get the money out of the door of MRC to the researchers, so that the researchers can be able to do what they're supposed to do. And you know, other stakeholders have got their other roles. The academic institutions, for example, they have to make sure that the research that they do is ethically sound. So you have got these ethics committees, which are really the watchdogs of the type of research that has to be done, even if you are faced with an emergency. Then the role of SAHPRA, for example, will be to make sure that they protect the public, so that as you do research, you don't exploit the public. And if you're going to test any new unlicensed, unregistered medicine to the community is protected, and they will play that role. So just a second. So you now see that you know, you have got different role players who are complementary in terms of the roles that they are playing, and they have to do this to make sure that they protect the public. And when they do that, of course, the researchers have to make sure that they fast track the research process without jeopardizing, you know, the safety of the public, and if they're testing the product without jeopardizing the safety, quality, and efficacy of the product that is under research. So those are some of important reflections that one has to consider when, you know, conducting research during a public health emergency. You have to act fast because usually if you have to do this in peacetime, the process, for example, of just doing the research can take anything between, you know, 3 to 5 years. But because you need to act swift, you need to get quick answers during the pandemic, you have to make sure that you have got processes in place to shorten this roadmap. So I think it's important that we keep that in mind, and we know that whether we are in a public health emergency or not, research is important, and is more so important when you're dealing with unknown pathogen. I will leave it there, but before I step off, I think I just want to raise something which is very, very important as well for the countries and the communities where this research is taking place. If we think about South Africa now, which is doing clinical trials for COVID-19 vaccine, the big issue here is that you are using the communities in South Africa to do this research. If the vaccine is found, will South Africa have access to the vaccine? And it's a big question, because even if you know, the company does have a moral obligation, you know, to provide the vaccine to South Africa, there are a number of dynamics which are at play. And maybe the best way to think about it is that if South Africa had the capacity to design a COVID-19 vaccine and also test it and manufacture it, when this vaccine is available, who is going to get priority? Will it be South Africa, or will it be somebody outside South Africa before South Africa is considered? And once you think about it that way, you start to realize how important is this, debate about access to the vaccine, because everybody's anxious because of these geopolitical tensions that we are experiencing at the moment, and we know that the rich countries are already, paying in advance. The companies, pharmaceutical companies, who will be manufacturing the vaccine, so that they can stockpile for their own citizens. So the issue here is that while the companies might have moral obligations to provide the vaccines to the countries which participated in clinical trials, if you think about realities that are there in ground, and it becomes really something that you cannot afford to turn a blind eye to, because we just don't know how it's going to play out. And I'm not trying to instill a sense of fear that South Africa will not have access to the vaccine, but just bear in mind that this is going to be something that is done for the first time in the world, and we just don't know how it will play out. Be as it may, it is important to make noise. It is important that the critical stakeholders like WHO should really take the lead to make noise about access to potential COVID-19 vaccine, so that they can have a proper framework in place before the vaccine is available, and be able to make sure that the poor countries, especially the lower income countries and middle low income countries, have got access to the vaccines. Because there's no doubt that rich countries, high income countries, will have access to the vaccine because they've got money to really buy in advance, buy in bulk, and if nobody is going to talk for the lower income countries, obviously they will be left behind when the vaccine becomes available. But the other reality is the fact that when the vaccine becomes available, you will not have enough doses to supply the global population. I mean, we're talking about, if I'm not wrong, close to 8 billion, in terms of the size of the global population. So a single company will not be able to do this, and this is the reason why more vaccines are needed. If you have got more than one vaccine licensed, then it becomes easier to manufacture enough doses to supply the world. Even if you manufacture enough doses, you should have some kind of a priority list, because not everybody will be number one in the queue to get the vaccine. So it's another area that requires some reflection, and I think we need to continue to talk about it. So some of you might be aware of what we call COVAX facility. This is a network that has been set up recently as part of Access to COVID-19 Tools Accelerator. And the idea here is that they would like to accelerate global vaccine access once there is a vaccine. So WHO is involved. Other than WHO, you have got Gavi that will be able to do pooling of financial resources to secure the vaccine, and then the CEPI, Coalition for Epidemic Preparedness and Innovation, that is really at forefront of developing new COVID-19 vaccines. So hopefully they will be catalysts, and they will be able to help in other countries. So I don't know, looking at the time, maybe I can pause here and see whether we can entertain some questions.
Great, thank you so much, Prof.
Yeah.
Thank you, much appreciated. I think we do have some questions. I think I'll just cover a few that were submitted, and then we can get straight into the chat questions that have been submitted. I like what you said, though, in terms of your reflections on our responses not being perfect. And also juxtaposing that with your call that we need to act fast. And I think certainly in this group, that whole concept of rapid action, especially as it relates to regulators and the council, has certainly been concerning us, because what we have been asking is acting fast at what cost? And we've always seen that under the guise of acting fast, whether that's legitimate or not, communities have continuously been left behind. So certainly as a group, as we move forward in this pandemic with yourselves and many others as our partners, that'll certainly be forefront in our minds in terms of what cost does moving rapidly come with. So Prof, just to pivot off that, some scientists in recent months have made public statements on the need to keep science and community engagement separate. Where would you place the role of communities in that ecosystem of research?
Should I respond, or are you going to give a list?
I can give you a couple if you prefer that. Okay, so so that one would be,
maybe I should take it, but just tell me if I need to keep it succinct, because I don't know how many questions you might have.
There's quite a few, so I think let's keep responses to a minute each, if possible.
Okay. So it is important that you should separate, the science from public discussion, because sometimes public discussion can be based on non-scientific information. But the whole reason we do science is to benefit the community. So if you do science and it cannot benefit the community, it's a waste of time. It's a waste of resources. So there must be an overlap. There must be an interface between science and community. And that is my view. Perhaps it just depends on what kind of, scientific debate or discussion you are referring to. But for example, the things that I've mentioned as part of a scientific debate or public debates is important, really, to put science and community views together.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for that. Prof, you have been the Vice President for Research at the MRC for nearly 7 years now. What is the one personal reflection that you take from that time in leadership? And has the advent of COVID shifted that lesson in any way?
Absolutely. Since my time at MRC, I've been working as a scientist, but now I'm seeing my role more and more as an advocate. In other words, a science advocate, because I'm trying to make sure that the scientific evidence that is emerging can be applied, especially to save lives. So if, for example, I know that the non-pharmaceutical interventions do work, I need to preach that, and I think that has been the most important lesson that I've learned, because it's not just really generating information; it's about applying the information so that you can benefit the community.
Thank you for that. Prof, the SAMRC publishes weekly death numbers. Can you briefly introduce us to these numbers and what we should be looking for as civil society?
Yeah, I can talk about it in a crude way because it involves a lot of science and a number of steps. So what happens is that we do have a unit that is dealing with this. It's called the Burden of Disease Unit. So they've got a link with the Department of Home Affairs and Statistics, SA. So what they do, they look at the number of deaths which are reported to Department of Home Affairs, and they look at Stats SA numbers, and they try and reconcile the stats, and they are able to come up, with these statistics that they publish. The most important part is the fact that they've been doing this for many years, and as a result, they do have an understanding of the number of deaths that are expected at a given time period. For example, they are able to do some projections for the period that we are in terms of number of deaths expected. So it became clear that when we are in the middle of this COVID-19 pandemic, then the number of deaths are higher than what is expected. And because you have got this historical data, you are able to raise the alarm, because you can see that the numbers are actually shooting beyond the maximum level that you expect. So in short, I think that's how they look at the numbers, and that's how they've been able to really raise the alarm to say that that we have got more excess deaths than what we expect.
Yeah, and I think certainly the issue of excess deaths has been something that us as a collective are keen to learn more about and explore, and we'll certainly do that in the coming weeks. Prof, one of the last questions I have here from the pre-submitted ones before we go into the chat is, what are your thoughts on the role of pharma in research during pandemics?
The pharma does have a role, and they do exercise this role. Obviously, during the pandemic, they do have a social role, corporate social responsibility. They do exercise this at times, and academics and science funders, they do fund research. What may not necessarily be clear to the general public is the fact that many of these pharmaceutical companies, they do have their own research funding schemes that researchers can actually apply for and have access to money. And obviously that money is invested in doing research. So they do play a role in terms of uplifting research in the community. And in addition, it's not like they are not doing their own research, their own in-house research. They are still continuing with it.
Yes, thank you. And I think certainly as part of this series of calls, we've had these discussions before around pharma. And if one thing pharma has taught us very well is to be very alert in terms of the finite details, in terms of how pharmaceutical investment happens during pandemics. We've certainly seen this, for example, with Oxford, where Prof. Madi was sharing with us on the last webinar that a pharmaceutical company, AstraZeneca, essentially owns the Oxford vaccine in its entirety. And then what does that mean? So I think it's really, this whole pandemic in general, I think has really compelled us as civil society to up our game in terms of the lessons we learn, the lessons we unlearn, especially from our time working around HIV. Prof, what are your thoughts around the use of BCG for revaccination in COVID-19 research?
Sorry, come again?
What are your thoughts on the use of BCG revaccination in
Oh,
COVID-19 research?
okay. Yeah, look, it is part of research, and you should be aware that researchers are trying all kinds of avenues to come up with solutions to fight the epidemic. So BCG was proposed as one of the vaccines that could actually protect other diseases. And the other vaccine that was proposed is polio vaccine. There are some Americans that are actually saying, American academics that are saying that polio vaccine, especially the oral polio vaccine, can actually be useful for preventing COVID-19. But look, at the moment, it's still a research, and it hasn't been proven as efficacious tool. So we will. I think this is part of the diversity of views that I spoke about. That it's not like you need to kill it, but if you think the strategy is not working, be prepared, to change. Be nimble enough, because if you don't, you will continue to head in the wrong direction.
Yeah. I certainly think that's partially in line with some of our activities around a specific trial that's happening in Cape Town called TASK, and we've certainly been liaising with the MRC and the various ethics bodies to hold the collective to account, and it's certainly a learning curve for us. Prof, I'm aware we have 8 minutes left. I want to try and get to at least a few of the questions in the box. As you were speaking, we have been sharing some of your questions in the box, so as people respond as well, we'll ensure we get answers to that in our written call summary. Wilfred is asking, how would we measure the impact of an emergency response? i.e., what sort of metrics would we use for impact measurement?
Yeah, very good question. I don't have a good answer. But I think what comes to my mind is things like the number of lives saved. If you look at South Africa, for example, I think most of us, the community, do concur that COVID-19 hasn't had the same impact in terms of number of deaths like we have seen in other European countries and USA, maybe even some South American countries. So that is probably really a measure of an impactful immediate response. That whatever that you put in place as a strategy, even if it was really not perfect, but you have been able to save lives. But the flip side of it could be that you saved lives, but people have lost jobs, and the economy is suffering, and people might die, of hunger than COVID-19 disease. Unfortunately, this is part of what I mentioned, that when you balance decisions, can you really cater all the realities, and it's often difficult.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for that. Prof. Ntanda is asking, the clinical trials registry still shows active trials on hydroxychloroquine. Does that show how debatable or one-sided the prevalent stance of this drug is, or in the discussions around this drug is? I guess that speaks to the general media. In addition to the clinical trials registry, we've heard about all of the absolutely terrible things around hydroxychloroquine. So why are we still seeing this being researched more and more?
Yes, and I mentioned it because I know that the debate is not over. There are still researchers who believe that it works, and they have not been given enough space to show that it works, because the research was clouded by negative sentiments about the drug. So it will still appear in the clinical trial registry because there is still some research on hydroxychloroquine. So the debate is not over. We just need to watch the space.
Oh, thank you for that. A question posted on the group: what makes you proud about SAMRC's tangible contribution or claim to transforming research? And what data, if any, can you share to support that claim?
It is certainly an excellent question. And I never thought about it. But if there is anything that I can share, it's not going to be related to COVID-19 because the contribution SAMRC has made towards COVID-19 response, I would say that the results are still in progress. We funded or co-funded, the vaccine trial that GloPID-R is doing, but the trial is still going on. If we have a vaccine, I think that would be something that I say here is a tangible, product that MRC has contributed to. So for COVID-19, there's a lot of research that MRC is funding. We have been able to repurpose funding to almost over 100 million rands to fund different components of research in the country. Obviously, the clinical trial is just a good example to mention because people connect to that and is something that has been highly publicized. But there are many other research that we are funding, but research is still continuing because it takes time. So where we transformed really the lives of people, if you look at our track record as the organization, we have been able to fund research at universities, and we have been able to come up with or rather fund research that was part of a clinical development of other vaccines, say rotavirus vaccine. It was tested here in South Africa, first African country, to test rotavirus vaccine. And pneumococcal vaccines, Shabir Mahdi has always been, the leader with the other researchers, of course, like and so on and so on. So there are a number of things that I can mention, but not necessarily related to COVID-19. But certainly MRC has got a proud legacy, even in the area of HIV, ARVs, and so on. So the only thing is that when you conduct a clinical trial, it is very expensive and not a single local funder like MRC, where funding is limited, will be able to fund everything. So we co-fund in most of the cases.
Great, thank you. Prof, I know we have 1 minute left, so I'm going to ask you to bear with us. And in closing, could you touch on, or could you really speak to us around going forward? These conversations will continue weekly for the next year. So the platform is always there, and we certainly will be reaching out to you over those few months to engage further. But having had this engagement now, what would you say is perhaps the singular most important role, in your view, that civil society can and should be playing in the context of COVID-19 research?
Yeah, I think we need to be open to collaboration because researchers will always bank on communities to do research. There is a research that obviously you can do, which may not necessarily require community participation, but usually, research that is looking at, drugs, vaccines, and stuff like that. This is where community participation is very crucial. And I would say that be open to collaboration, be prepared to raise your voice if you feel that things are not done the right way. Researchers are only humans. Even if there are different role players as watchdogs of doing research, it is still possible that somebody can overlook some processes and steps. So if you are a member of community or member of advocacy group, if something is not right, feel free really to come out and say it. Not in a way, but I would say it in a constructive manner. But researchers are used to criticism. So I don't think if you criticize us, we will take it personal. So Tian, for me, that is the most important message I can leave for this group. Be prepared to engage and collaborate.
Great, thank you so much. Colleagues, we're just past 1 minute past 11. Thank you everyone for taking the time and joining us on this webinar. We will be in touch with everyone around our next webinar next week and the shape and form of that. This has been our 7th webinar in the series, and obviously we have a lot of lessons and reflections in terms of how the webinars are going, our engagement of the guests, and our engagement with you as the participants. So stay tuned to the usual social media channels for updates in terms of how that process will unfold. Prof. Mphahlele, thank you on behalf of the Vaccine Advocacy Resource Group and the African Alliance and its partners, including the Community Constituency COVID-19 Front, TAC, APHA, and all of our partners for taking time out of your schedule to speak with us today. We hope this is the start of a long, engaging partnership, and we look forward to speaking in the coming months.
Tian, thank you very much. I really appreciate this opportunity, and I think I've learned a lot as well. So thanks for the invitation once again, and thanks to the entire group for listening to me.
Thank you, everyone. Have a good Thursday.
Thanks.
Thanks.